Hi, gay. Maxie here. Hoping you're all having a wonderfully queer Pride Month. In this week's episode, Carolyn and I discuss the AIDS epidemic, and specifically its course through the U.S. While this was a dark time for queer people, we have made a lot of progress through medical research and clinical trials, and today an AIDS diagnosis is no longer a death sentence. This progress is due in huge part to various organizations receiving local and grassroots support from people who care. And that's why this week we'd like to highlight the AIDS Health Foundation, or AHF. AHF is a global nonprofit organization providing cutting-edge medicine and advocacy to over 1.5 million people in 45 countries, and they are currently the largest provider of HIV and AIDS medical care in the U.S. You can support them by donating directly, helping to spread the word, or by shopping at one of their thrift stores called Out of the Closet, and you can find these thrift stores in the following areas: Brooklyn, Columbus, Ohio, Atlanta, Orlando, Tampa, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Houston, Dallas, Chicago, San Diego, LA, San Francisco, and Seattle. You'll find a link to AHF and Out of the Closet websites in the description below. As always, stay safe, stay gay, and happy Pride.
Hello.
I'm Maxie,
Hi, I'm Carolyn.
and this is Mutable Immutables, the show where we quibble queerly.
Yeah. And exchange pleasantries.
Yes.
What's the tea, Christine? What's up?
The tea is, nothing special. We're just vibing. It's Pride Month, y'all. And so, just like last week, we are going to veer away from RuPaul's Drag Race, even though this week's episode was fantastic. I actually really loved that challenge. I thought it was really cute. But we're not going to be focusing on that as much today, or this whole month, because instead we're going to be focusing on queer history and the people and events that brought us as a community to where we are today.
Yep. That's it. So chronologically, last week we talked about the Stonewall uprisings and also sort of what led to that. And so chronologically, we're covering the AIDS crisis today. So gonna go ahead and put a trigger warning for homophobia and lots of death and lots of neglect and descriptions of shit like that.
And do you know what? This is kind of, I don't necessarily want to call it salient, but have you seen that monkeypox is like a higher threat to gay men? It's like it's giving flashbacks in a way that I don't appreciate.
Well, and gay men maybe also just have a reason to maybe be reporting interesting spots that show up on their body. So
that's true too.
We'll see how that shakes out. But yeah, so that's what we're talking about today. It's not fun, but it's a really important history, specifically because of the amount of community grassroots organizing in literally every sphere, from like journalistic to artistic to medical, literally everything that it took for the government to finally pay attention to what was happening. I would say, so we're covering roughly 1980 to like 95. So obviously like there's lead up before the 80s, but I'm kind of stopping in 95 and we'll like slightly cover like where we're at now. But okay, so let's get into it. Do you have anything you would like to say before we start?
More or less, again, this is just us going over the history of it. Like Carolyn said, this is going to be a little bit darker and there are trigger warnings, so proceed with caution. But I think in Pride Month, I think it's important that we remember, how we got here. And it's okay to celebrate as long as we're also remembering the people who died for us to get to where we are, which is not me saying that these men died
Yeah, they
for
didn't die
Pride Month in
for it. Yeah.
2020, but they're members of our
um,
community, and you hear a lot that it's like, oh, we've made it so far, we've overcome all this stuff. No, a lot of us didn't, and this is why. So,
yeah, we lost a whole generation.
hmm
Okay. Uh, there's no better place to start than at the beginning. Also, I'm not like an epidemiological researcher. Like, I don't, and I'm also not like a political scientist. I am like somewhat of a working on being a professional researcher though, so I do feel like I'm like I'm well intentioned in my research, so I'm trying to be thorough, but like if I get names mixed up, and I'm not going to go into details about like the specificities of the virus, although I did make some sort of an attempt to understand it. Just know that I'm doing my best here.
well, we all appreciate it.
So what we know generally is HIV is one of two strains of this virus that were kind of like the original. So HIV-1, which is what we think of now, is thought to have originated around the Belgian Congo, which we now know, of course, is DRC. Uh, it's a somewhat adapted from this simian immunodeficiency virus, so it was passed from like chimpanzees to humans, and it's I guess widely assumed that this is through the practice of hunting bushmeat, and someone gets like a surface wound while
Hmm.
butchering meat or some shit. I don't know. Um, but that's kind of like the main consensus. But there's a variety of different theories about how it spread so quickly among humans. But kind of the underlying theme is, of course, colonialism. This is roughly 40 years after the scramble for Africa started, and roughly 40 years before the decade of like independence. So colonialism was definitely like the main factor here, but it's a debate on whether it was sexually transmitted or if it was from unsafe injection sites from these vaccination trials they were doing, or if it was from forced labor leading to increased sexual activity in that way.
Well, now, and
Um,
to be clear, it's not like a COVID situation where it spreads from being in close proximity to someone or from breath and respiration. It's specifically bodily fluids. Yeah.
yeah, I promise we will get into those kind of
Okay.
intricacies. Um,
Okay.
so it's a mystery of kind of how it spread so much. It's a mystery of how it got sort of to America. But the general consensus is colonialism and then airlines. So
Hmm.
there's like somewhat of like a misconception that there was this patient zero who was a French Canadian flight attendant named Gaetan Dugas. Sorry, don't know. Um, People call him Patient Zero. He was actually part of a study and being referred to as Patient O for outside of California. Um, so that got misconstrued as Patient Zero. So this person was not like Patient Zero.
Oh.
He was misconstrued as such. But he was connected sexually to I think 40 of the original like 248ish patients in America. So
Oh, wow.
flight attendants specifically, like obviously between like New York and San Francisco,
They're getting
I
around.
would stop. Right, these are like highly gay populated areas, which we'll get to why. Um, so that's kind of like maybe how it was thought to spread across the country like that. So the first official patient in like 1982 was named Ken Horn in San Francisco, like diagnosed as having had it in April 1980, possibly a sex worker. But there was this person like 10 years earlier in St. Louis, Missouri, in 1969 named Robert Rayford, who at the time had died from this rare disease. And it was like a big tabloid story, and nobody knew what he died from, but it was like retroactively determined that he was like an early person with AIDS. So there's kind of two like main, well, three like ground zeros, I guess, that
Hmm.
started spreading in the gay community. So that's New York City, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. We've kind of talked about like where the gay liberation movement was at in New York City after Stonewall a little bit. I won't go into too much detail, and I also am still planning on reading Gay New York, which talks about early gay New York. So I'll get there at another time. Um, AIDS was thought to have hit New York as early as like 1971, and there it originally passed mostly between intravenous drug users. So in like 75, 74, 76, people would call this illness that all these users were dying from, they would call it like a junkie flu or like a junkie pneumonia, which we now know like they were probably definitely dying from AIDS. But
Hmm.
of course, these are people not going out and pursuing healthcare on their own, and they're people that are certainly disposable by society. Nobody's going out of their
Hmm.
way to help them. So no research was put into this phenomenon. Um, this was also after a fiscal crisis had taken a lot of resources away from like methadone clinics, so there was more use anyway, and there's no like safe injection sites anywhere. Um,
Now, in
but
this time period, also there was an uptick in popularized drug use, right? Like mostly things like marijuana and mushrooms, I think, and
I would
LSD.
say heroin. No, I would say heroin specifically during this time, especially in New York City.
Well, I think
Um,
about like Woodstock and how the culture had like popularized drug use, and it was like probably reaching a bigger crowd at that time than it had been before as well. But I'm not a historian.
yeah. Also, just like insane amounts of poverty. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I would say that was like maybe a little bit earlier, like the '60s and stuff. But I mean, certainly probably led to it. Uh, it was proven later that like HIV could be passed from mother to child because this woman who was known to be an HIV positive intravenous drug user, her two children were tested positively in 1977. So that's as early as we knew that it wasn't just uh, transmitted through males having sex.
Mm.
So in New York City, St. Vincent Hospital is basically like ground zero. Not I keep saying ground zero, but it's kind of it was the first like AIDS clinic, only second to this one in San Francisco, and we'll talk all about it. But it's kind of the only place dealing with people with AIDS. So we're gonna hold off on New York City for a minute. We're gonna switch to San Francisco, since
Okay.
I didn't get to, we haven't talked about it on this podcast, and like places don't just become gay meccas for no reason.
Hmm.
So the first called Notorious Gay Bar was called the Dash in 1908 in San Francisco, and there was Mona's, the first lesbian bar, in 1934. So World War I, gay soldiers or anyone like thought to be gay got what's called a blue discharge. It's not honorable or dishonorable discharge from the military. It was a blue discharge, so it was like known that that's why they weren't in the army. So since there's a lot of military centers right there in the ports, they would just kind of get dropped off in these port cities as they were discharged. So these collections of
Interesting.
gay men discharged from the military just had to stay somewhere. So they stayed kind of where they were put.
So the military is to thank for San Francisco being the gayest city in the country.
Oh, the military is to thank for like a lot of gay stuff.
Love that. Kind of, sort of. I don't know how I feel about
I
that
mean,
actually, but
we'll talk about the military maybe off the pod. Um,
okay.
I'm gonna be. Never mind. So systemic blue discharge started really in World War II, and so soldiers were getting discharged from the Pacific Theater, and then same thing. They're settling in San Francisco, which already has like this like kind of booming scene from the 20s and 30s, right?
And this is kind of
So
also when and where Polari started, right? Was like San
I have
Francisco in like the 30s and 40s.
I
I'll
don't
have
know
to
the
look
time
into
period.
that.
Okay, yeah, I literally don't know. So anyway, it's kind of the same deal like it was in New York City, where a lot of these bars are owned by the mafia, and it's of course illegal to, dance with a same-sex person. It's illegal to give a liquor license to a bar that, like a gay bar. So, they're owned by the mafia, and so police are cracking down doing these, like, raids on all these bars that catered to military men in the name of, like, protecting soldiers. But, like, they were catering towards military men because, like, all the military men were gay.
Gay.
Yeah. San Francisco also had, like, just a large working class and immigrant community of, like, Nordic and then later Irish and Italian immigrants. So it also becomes one of those things where it's like alliances in the underground, right? After World War II, there was sort of a white flight out to the suburbs, of course, and so downtown San Francisco has all these huge, enormous, beautiful buildings that were now empty, and so a lot of the gays were able to, like, scoop up these places because they were, like, the only ones willing to rent to the gays anyway. Also, at this point, I'm talking about, like, gay men specifically. Women weren't allowed to own credit cards till, like, the 70s. There's a lot of reasons why the movement...
And that's when divorce rates went up. But that's a separate issue.
Is it separate?
Well...
So it becomes known for these gay neighborhoods that you've all, like, probably heard of, like the Tenderloin District, like Market Street specifically,
the Castro.
And then, like, Folsom Street, the Castro, exactly. Yeah. In 1950, there was already some, like, movement of, like, the New York City beats to California, like Allen Ginsberg moved there in the 50s, and so there's also, like, that level of, like, appreciation for the arts stemming. And that's also when the Daughters of Bilitis, which is one of the oldest lesbian organizations, and then the Mattachine Society, which was, like, a gay communist organization, were started.
Oh, fuck yeah, work.
In 1961, Jose Sarria becomes the first openly gay man to run for public office. He ran for, like, the board of supervisors. And he actually did, like, surprisingly well in the election, and people were like, oh shit, gay voters, like, actually wield political powers. He said after that, he was like, nobody ran in San Francisco without knocking on the doors of the gays after that. The first Gay Business Association was in 1962. First publication on gay news in Life magazine was in 1964. It was about the San Francisco leather bar called the Toolbox, which is, of course, around Folsom Street. First gay liberation group in the 1965 Tenderloin District called the Vanguard was a group for, like, LGBT youth basically. Also, I'm using the term LGBT, but, like, it wasn't even LGB until, like, the 80s, so, like, they weren't calling it that, but you know what I mean.
It was pretty much just LG at this time, right? Like, at least publicly.
Yeah, I didn't write it down, but there was, like, a specific time where, like, B got added, and now, of course, LGB is, like, a transphobic movement, but it wasn't back in the day. Yeah. I'm also just using, like, the gay liberation movement kind of, like, as an umbrella term. There's, like, a million different things you can call it, so I'm talking about the same thing. You know what I mean. Okay, so 1965, New Year's Day, this event that, like, some people call San Francisco's Stonewall. So, and I'm talking about this not only because it was, like, an early, I don't know what to call it, it was an early instance of publicized police brutality specifically towards the gays. So, and I'm also telling this because, like, you have to understand how important the Catholic Church was in the original gay liberation movement. Like, nuns are responsible for saving so many people, and the Catholic Church was kind of, like, one of the first organizations to actually care about helping AIDS patients. So there's this New Year's Day ball, right? And so we talked about in Paris's Burning kind of the importance of, like, private parties, because, again, you can't dance at the bars, right? So you have these private parties where you're allowed to dress and drag, do whatever. So the Council on Religion and the Homosexual is what it was called. They had talked to the police before, been like, we don't need you there, we don't want you there, like, no police presence, period. And police were like, okay, fine. So and this is meant to raise money for the council. So Of course, the night comes, and the police are there. They shine a huge light on the entrance, and they're taking people's photos as they walk in. So, of course, the two lawyers who had already spoken with them and decided, they get arrested for civil disobedience, as well as two other heterosexual lawyers. They were then represented by the ACLU in court, and the charges were dropped. So it was actually ended up being a really big win. And then a year later, we kind of talked about it last episode, the Compton Cafeteria riots happened. So that's the Compton Cafeteria was one of the only places that was open like 24 hours that would let you come in if you were like visibly gay or dressed in drag.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, that made them subject to like police raids. So this was just
Right.
one particular instance of an uprising against that.
That was actually the fun fact on my board at work. We do fun facts every day, and for Pride Month, we're doing queer ones, and one of them was about the Compton Cafeteria riots.
Very nice.
Yeah.
My job sent around like a PowerPoint on for Pride Month, and it was on like the leather movement. I thought that was so fucking cool for my square ass corporation of a company.
Well, literally every single person at my store is queer. Like, there are a bunch of queers at the other stores in the company too, but we're at 100%, and so we like to keep it that way and highlight that.
And taking a break because that was a lot.
Yeah. Do you want me to go through the next one?
Yeah, you just read my little bullets there.
Okay, with Epidemic or New York?
Epidemic. I'm done.
Okay. So, the epidemic officially started June 5th, 1981, with a CDC report on Kaposi sarcoma in 5 gay men from Los Angeles. And this was an article in the New York Times about a month later. So in 1982, more cases were reported among gay men in SoCal, and that led researchers to believe that it was sexually transmitted. And at that point, it became known as GRID, which stands for Gay-Related Immunodeficiency, which some of you may have heard before. I definitely found out about that after I found out about AIDS, like when I was a teenager. But it's also, a lot less respectfully, been called gay cancer, gay plague, and then also community-acquired immunodeficiency, or CAID, or acquired community immunodeficiency syndrome, which is ACIDS.
So like all the parts in those last two are there for what we know it as now. Just acquired immunodeficiency.
It was a journey. Syndrome. They just kept shuffling things around.
I know, exactly. So we got like junkie flu, we've got gay flu. Like, no, we'll just keep giving it terrible nicknames. We won't actually find out what it is.
Instead of like doing something about it, let's just come up with a new name for it. So then by August of that year, 1982, they realized that it was affecting hemophiliacs, IV drug users, and Haitian immigrants. And so it became known as Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, or AIDS. And they didn't start screening the blood supply until 1985. And then HIV was officially named as the virus in 1983 after comparison with French researchers who likely discovered the virus first. So it sounds like because of the spread of this, there were several different people who were doing research on it and kind of came to their own conclusions with similar results. Yeah.
Yeah, I left that in there, and you know what? I should have changed that language because it was later. It's like definitely the French who discovered it first. We'll get into it with my timeline, but classic America. But yeah, so since the beginning of the epidemic, again, 1981, June 5th, 1,216,917 people have been diagnosed with AIDS in the U.S.
So
sorry, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, for those of you listening, take this as a very long form ad for PrEP and getting your regular testing, because obviously it's not still at the threat level that it was at the time, but there was a lot of work that was put into making this not deadly, and take every precaution that you can. It's Pride Month, for sure. Go out and celebrate and have sex and whatever, but do it safely, because the virus is still around. It's not it's not an immediate death sentence, but it's still around. Also, undetectable means untransmittable.
Yeah.
Be respectful of these people who are HIV positive, please.
True that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I have like plenty of friends who are HIV positive, and I'm just like so proud of every one of them. The fact that I even know that about them, I'm like, thank you for sharing that with me, and I like hope to be like an ally, in this, because
I'm an
not that
ally.
long ago that was a death sentence. Yeah, I'm an ally. No, I should explain that I have done a lot of work with like Planned Parenthood and like safe sex campaigns. If you look hard enough, there's pictures of me on the internet as dressed up as a safe sex fairy, or
I love that.
demonstrating how to put a condom on. Oh God. Um, so yeah, safe sex forever. Wrap it up. There's also other sexually transmitted infections besides HIV, and even though it's not like a death sentence, and there's nothing wrong with being positive at any of those statuses, you should still be as safe as humanly possible.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm gonna start with my timeline. I know we just talked about how it officially started in 1981, but I'm gonna start with 1978.
Context.
Yeah, kind of arbitrarily, but also, so June 25th, in 1978, we get our first pride flag, which was like 8 colors instead of 6, and they each stood for something. But November.
Real quick, did you know the largest flag in the world is a mile-long pride flag?
So dramatic. I shouldn't be surprised.
I know. I love it.
Later that year, 1978, November 27th, Harvey Milk was assassinated, along with Mayor George Moscone. So I just want to like kind of put where we're at in gay rights. Like, we were specifically in San Francisco, like so much community support. We had gays in the legislature abound, and then suddenly this like guy who was like a friend of the community, a friend in the community, like subject to a political assassination by a guy who's only served like 7 years or something after that. But the first public performance of the San Francisco Gay Men's Choir was at his memorial. So there's always a glimmer of nice things coming from terrible things. So this is where we're at in San Francisco at the end of the 70s. So 1979, we get the moral majority. Which eventually led into the like Newt Gingrich type of republicanism, just slimy. So this is when this started, but we also get the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, which is gay men, but like literally everybody, who dress up as nuns and do like demonstrations, protests, and like fundraising and that sort of thing. They're kind of everywhere, but they started in 1979 as well. That year, there was also an assault by off-duty officers at a lesbian bar, Peg's Place. And we know that, like, lesbian bars have way more trouble staying open than gay bars, so I don't want to, like, minimize, like, specific attacks on lesbians in this.
Yeah, lesbian history gets erased a lot by the, like, gay men's history with things like this and Stonewall and all of that, but, like...
Yeah.
They didn't have an easy time.
I mean, some of the only people willing to physically touch AIDS patients were nuns and lesbians. We owe women a lot.
Yes, always.
Yeah. So skip ahead to 1981. Ronald Reagan takes office.
Boo.
That year, the epidemic officially starts. A little on the nose. So in December of that year, Bobby Campbell, who became known as like the AIDS poster boy, was diagnosed with Kaposi sarcoma in San Francisco. And what that is like kind of what you think of when you think of somebody in the late stages of the age, just like these lesions. It's like, I think it's technically related to the herpes virus or something, but it's these like dark spots on the skin. And all of these are like AIDS-related illnesses or something, like opportunistic illnesses, which is like when your immune system is depleted, that's when these illnesses swoop in. So that's why like people who like die of AIDS don't die of AIDS, they die of like pneumonia, tuberculosis, that sort of thing. But they wouldn't have had that without AIDS, which is
so like the way to conceptualize it, I think, right, would be that AIDS kind of, once it came in the body, it just kind of like suppressed the immune system and like paved the way for any normal little virus that you've probably been vaccinated against to come in and take a stronger effect. Things like like you said, pneumonia and tuberculosis, right? It wasn't AIDS that was killing
Yeah.
people. It was AIDS that was
Right.
letting other viruses kill these people and other illnesses.
Also, let me go ahead and be specific just in case I forget to say it later. AIDS is the condition caused by the HIV virus. So you get a virus that depletes your immune system, your T cells, then you're diagnosed with AIDS syndrome. Then you're more likely to get diseases like pneumonia, that sort of thing. So you die with AIDS because of something else. Of course, nobody knew this at the time.
I think it was most commonly pneumonia too, which we also saw a lot of COVID patients more recently die from, was pneumonia due to complications of COVID.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So 1982. This is kind of when a lot of gay activism starts. And there is like, I'm going to mention just like a lot of random people and random like campaigns, but like it doesn't even scratch the surface. I swear to God, like there's so many like splinter campaigns and random groups that people started. So like these are just kind of the main ones in New York and San Francisco, kind of the ones you hear about all the time. But like there are so many different groups that like came together to help with this. So 1982, gay men's health crisis started by Larry Kramer in January. And Larry Kramer is one of those people who you're just going to hear about through this entire thing. So it started by Larry Kramer, Edmund White, and a couple others, with Paul Popham as the president, 81 to 85. They offered a crisis counseling center, which was started by Roger McFarlane, who was later named the executive director. They offered legal aid, volunteers, the buddy system, social workers, networking, community, that sort of thing. In June, an article gets published linking it to amyl nitrate. Of course, we know that's not true now, but this is just sort of the way they were trying to connect it to how the gays were getting it, and the gays were using amyl nitrate, which is poppers, if you don't know. So an article publishes it linking it to that. That's not true, but I'm trying to give you like the timeline. July, Haitian immigrants start displaying infection. This is when they start naming it AIDS instead of GRID, because they're like, oh, why are these other people getting it? Why are like blood transfusion patients? Why are drug users? Like, why are these other random people getting it? September 24th, the CDC uses the term AIDS for the first time. So also this year, there's a booklet published called How to Have Sex in an Epidemic, One Approach, by two gay men living with AIDS. It outlines, and this was distributed in New York, it outlines how to have affectionate relationships while staying safe. It's the first time men were advised to use condoms with other men, because if you think about it before that...
Isn't this also when the idea of intracural sex became kind of more popular? Like non-penetrative sexual activity?
Oh, yeah. I would assume so, probably.
Yeah.
It kind of like took a minute for like everybody to get on board with what was causing AIDS. We'll get there, but like, yeah, that would make sense. But like before that, you're only using a condom to prevent a pregnancy, right? And so they're like, I don't need that shit. So this booklet publishes it, and this is the start of kind of where we see these like underground information campaigns get distributed, like people reading medical journals and putting it in plain text language and like giving that to their friend group, basically.
Well, and then also zines were really popular in the 80s and 90s too, right?
It's exactly the time that zines are a thing anyway. Yeah, so like the framework was there. So similarly, there was also this pamphlet called Play Fair. It was published by Bobby Campbell, who we talked about a minute ago, the AIDS poster boy. He was a part of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, and his name was Sister Florence Nightmare, which is hilarious. And his
this was
Resurrection.
This was like an offshoot of drag. This was like an activist drag group almost, just with the theme of being nuns, but you get to like choose a name and all that. That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, it is like it's a persona, and it's actually, I looked into it a little bit. It's like your first year you have to like attend events and like volunteer and stuff. You don't get to wear the nun's outfit, and then after you do like however long, a year or whatever, then you get to like dress up in all white, and then after like 5 years you get to dress up as a nun. So it's kind of like a fraternal
It was a siblinghood.
siblinghood. Thank you.
Yeah.
And yeah, so they all had their names. Sister Florence Nightmare. So yeah, just another like easy to understand safe sex pamphlet that got distributed. So this year also, Cleve Jones, who was a friend of Harvey Milk, and also like a political aide, co-founded the San Francisco AIDS Foundation with Marcus Conant, who was a dermatologist. He was one of the first to diagnose and treat AIDS all the way back in 1981. PWA, which stands for People with AIDS, is an organization co-founded by Bobby Campbell. Again, he was like a nurse and activist. He was also one of just like the first people to be public with his diagnosis. So he's super important. And PWA, People with AIDS, kind of became like the accepted language. Like, you don't say AIDS victims. There was like really a push to refer to them as people with AIDS. So that same year, the Most Holy Redeemer Catholic Church in the Castro neighborhood gets a new pastor, Father Anthony McGuire, and they start doing AIDS outreach in the community. They officially formed the Gay and Lesbian Outreach Committee in 1983, and just as a result of kind of like where they are and who their parishioners were, they got known as the Gays and the Grays, because it was like the gays who either were HIV positive and being taken care of, or like their friends and allies, or like the nuns and like the elderly taking care of them. So it was very sweet, the Gays and the Grays. So 1983, January 1st, we get the first AIDS clinic. Ward 86, opened by Dr. Paul Volderbing and a partner. Also, he was thought to be the first clinician to create a documentary about the physicians and nurses on the front lines, which was called Life Before the Lifeboat. You used to really watch it. It's only like half an hour long, and I think it was on PBS, so you can just find it on YouTube. And it was like him interviewing all these like nurses who survived but like took care of all these people, and they kind of set the standard for like how to care for people with AIDS in like more of a hospice way than like the kind of institutional harsh light, like cold, kind of thing. So you're like making friends with them and you're like holding them. Like, physical contact is like so important because nobody knew how it spread. Like, these people thought that they were going, like, at this one doctor, Dr. Paul Volderbing, was like, his roommate had died of AIDS. He was like, well, if it's transmittable like that, like, I already have it, so I'm gonna like hold these people. And so like they didn't know, and that's the thing, is like everybody was terrified at this time. Like, nobody knew how it was spread. Like,
I mean, that's really relevant. Like early COVID, people were freaking out.
Yeah, I'm like kind of shying away from making COVID comparisons just because it's like emotionally exhausting dealing with the government incompetence of that as well.
But I think the mindset of people, like, it's kind of similar, because this is, when a new virus comes along that's killing so many people.
You're absolutely right. I'm just like, I'm almost like, you draw your own conclusions. I'm so tired. Like, I can't talk.
By the way, do you know if any of these organizations or people in particular influenced Marsha P. Johnson? Because that's what, as we talked about, that's what she did.
She was like part of the ACT UP in New York City.
And like, she would also, she would do the hospice stuff and like sit with the people who were dying.
Yeah. No, she was definitely part of that activism. We should have mentioned that in the New York section. Maybe I have it later. I don't know. But yeah, you're absolutely right. So Life Before the Lifeboat, definitely watch that. It's also so sad because like these people who are nurses for COVID, who were also nurses for the AIDS crisis, are like, not this again. Like, not this again. Plus, it's affecting everybody, every single person.
Yeah.
So 1983 is also the year that Dr. Francois Barsinussi isolates the retrovirus that's killing T cells. So she is the French scientist we mentioned earlier who like definitely discovered it first, like, and isolated that particular virus. There's this movie called And the Band Plays On, which is based on a book, which we'll talk about later because it gets published later. But that kind of tells the story of like all these people who were instrumental in the like discovering of the virus, and that kind of covers this story. So like, go Google the Wikipedia plot for that. It's also like 2.5 hours long, so like you don't have to watch it.
Will you text me the name of that? I'm gonna try to put some links in the description for these resources.
Oh my god, yeah, no, I'll give you a whole source list because I have consumed so much media over the last couple days.
This is why Carolyn is a great pod partner, because Carolyn will go down every rabbit hole. She will do all the research. She like knows everything. I love it.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate thing about me. Is like
I don't know if it's unfortunate.
I will find the rabbit hole. I don't know. Yeah, I've spent like probably 20 hours in the last 3 days working on this.
Oh wow. Dedicated.
Very dedicated. It's also just like interesting to me in like the worst way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, and also just like I feel guilty for like not knowing enough about what killed an entire generation of like gay elders. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like I knew more about AIDS in like sub-Saharan Africa than I knew about it in America.
Well, but that's not entirely your fault. Like, I mean, you've proven that like when you go out to find this information, you find this information, but like we don't have a baseline level of it because of the institutionalized education that we got.
Yeah, I mean, like some history classes I took, we probably didn't even make it up to the 80s. So like,
yeah,
we made it up to the Civil War. Anyway, yeah, so it's important queer history. I owe it to gay elders. Back to 1983. January 7th, we have the first cases reported in women by the CDC. March 4th, the CDC publishes a statement about the effect on Haitian immigrants and hemophiles and create these blood donor screening requirements. So after this, there's no excuse for, you know, even your homophobia can't hold you back because now it's affecting women and babies. But like still we didn't get any federal response for years. Still getting there. We'll get there eventually. Ronald Reagan's still around.
Fucking dick.
Yeah, so later in March, the AIDS Project LA started holding fundraisers at gay bars and discos. So May 20th, Dr. Francois reports her discovery of the retrovirus believed to cause AIDS. June 12th, we get the Denver Principles read at the National AIDS Forum. And this has to do with the Mattachine Society, I think. I didn't really go that much into it, but you should read them up. July, Cliff Morrison opens the first dedicated AIDS ward at San Francisco General, Ward 5B. There's a documentary by that same name that I want to watch after this. The issue was at San Francisco General, these patients were just overflowing from the ICU. And again, nobody knew how it spread, so they were just like having to block all these hallways off and like dedicate so much. They were like, no, we're just going to have to dedicate an entire ward. So he created it. And I'm sorry, I attributed this to Dr. Paul earlier. It was actually, it was Cliff Morrison in the Ward TV. He was an RN, and he was the one who, like, was like, no, we need to take care of these people like humans. And he would, like, he would famously, like, ask his patients, be like, what do you need as a person? Like, how can I take care of you? And they would be like, make sure somebody comes in and brushes my hair. Like, he would walk in, and these people, like, clearly hadn't had a bath for, like, a week because nobody wanted to touch them. So not only are these people dying, they're, like, feeling gross and, like, lonely and, like, dying without any dignity.
It makes me think of this scene in Rent, which, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen Rent, but there's a scene where Angel is in the hospital, and she's, you know, on her way out from AIDS, and, I think it's Collins who's there who's painting her nails, or maybe it's Mimi, but she's got someone there who's painting her nails while she's in bed, and it's just like, it's really sad but really sweet.
Yeah,
because they were just fully ignored by society. They were just dumped.
Yeah, honestly, I've gone to you should find a way to our listeners in your general community to volunteer for something like this. I've done the thing where you like go to a nursing home and paint their nails. I almost said those bitches. I'm not gonna call them that. Those ladies love that. So find a way to volunteer for things
Yeah.
like that. That's the thing is like you don't have to like you don't have to be a millionaire and give a fuck ton of money, but like you can give your like time. You can give your
Mm-hmm.
like personhood in that way. Um,
Yeah.
I would like to say I'm trying to speed through this. Not that it's more important, but that a new episode of Love Island comes on in 40 minutes. And we're only in 1983, and Ronald Reagan still hasn't said shit yet. So,
Yeah, let's cliff notes the rest.
1983, Zhbrayev, I know, and Klaus Nomi die within a few days of each other. Larry Kramer leaves the GMHC, says they're politically impotent. 1984, March 1, paper on patient zero, patient letter O published. It was misconstrued as patient zero. We kind of talked about this, and they like, so now there's this French Canadian flight attendant that everybody thinks is patient zero, and he's not. He wasn't the most responsible, but he's not patient zero. So April, Department of Health and Human Services and Gallo announces he's found the cure for AIDS and the vaccine will be available in 2 years. Gallo is a scientist who claims
Cure or cause?
What did I say? I meant vaccine.
You said cure.
Wait, what did I say? There's no cure for AIDS. Hold on.
You said cure, but your notes say
okay.
cause.
I meant cause,
okay.
as in HIV, the virus being the cause for AIDS. There's no cure for AIDS. I apologize. And that the vaccine would be available in 2 years. We now know that Dr. Francois, the French scientist, discovered it first, but they decided that the French and the U.S. would share the credit for discovering it at the same time. Okay. 1984, that summer, the Folsom Street Fair is started in response to the closing of the bathhouses and the other places that the leather and fetish community would gather earlier this year. It was started by housing activists and community organizers as an opportunity to disseminate vital information and like the connections to health services that would normally be done at bars and gay bars and bathhouses. So like, you know, at the bar they'll have like a bucket of condoms, shit like that. They'll have like go get tested cards and stuff. So now there's no gay bars and bathhouses. They're like, all right, well, people still got to know this stuff. So they started a street fair, and now we know Folsom is like you're allowed to get naked in public, but like it was created for a very specific reason. That's why I included it.
Yeah, quick PSA also, kink absolutely belongs at Pride. Please do not be a prude this Pride season.
But cops don't.
Pigs do not belong at Pride.
Unless dressing up as a cop is your kink, in which case I would maybe examine where that's coming from. But also, I guess that should be allowed.
Or if you're a pig in like the horny gay way, that's fine. But
oh my god, stop. Okay. Anyway, I hate that we're like laughing and then I have to be like, and then another person died.
Well,
stop laughing. December of 1984. Ryan White is diagnosed with AIDS following a partial lung removal. And we'll talk about him next year. So just 1 second on him. 1985, March 2nd, antibody testing was approved by the FDA. It was called ELISA, and I forgot to write what it stands for.
Eliza.
Thank you. But that's when they started screening the blood supply. So like 3 years ago, we knew that AIDS was in the HIV was in the blood supply, and now we're screening it. So this whole story
as in like the
is like
blood supply for blood donations, right?
Right, people who need like blood transfusions, hemophiliacs, that sort of thing. In July of that year, we have the first AIDS walk by the APLA. Just days before that, on the 25th, Rock Hudson announced that he had AIDS. So after the walk, Elizabeth Taylor holds a fundraiser among the Hollywood elite and raises $1.3 million for the cause. So Rock Hudson is kind of like the turning point because he was friends with Ronald Reagan. So Reagan like had to acknowledge it. So August of that year, Ryan White is barred from going back to school. So he had a lung transplant, contracted the virus, and they don't let him go back to school. So his parents sued. They eventually won that case, but just a point. So September 17th of that year, Reagan mentions AIDS for the first time in a press conference in response to reporters' questions. In October, Rock Hudson dies. He was the first person kind of to first person who was kind of already in the spotlight to announce he had AIDS. He was, of course, an actor. Congress set aside $70 million for AIDS research at that point. Ricky Wilson of the B-52s also died that month. That year, there was also the first International AIDS Conference in Atlanta. The idea for the AIDS Memorial Quilt was first conceived by Cleve Jones, who we talked about earlier, and Ed Koch upholds the New York Health Department decision to close the bathhouses.
Now, this is a silly question. Is that Ed Koch of the Koch brothers?
Yes.
Ugh.
Yeah, so ironically, earlier he had passed some legislation equalizing, like, gay and heterosexual status in society. So due to that, once he upheld this direction to close the gay bathhouses, he had to close the straight ones too. So played everyone. 1986, the National Leather Association, formed in the summer, helped organize the March on Washington. We'll talk about that in a minute. February 6th, Reagan mentions AIDS to Congress for the first time. So this is 5 years later. This is 6 years into his 6 years later, 6 years into his presidency. May 1st, HIV is officially named to be the retrovirus that causes AIDS. Reagan has his Surgeon General create a report on it. July 18th, the National Minority AIDS Council was kind of unofficially founded when they were talking to the Surgeon General about their concerns. Attorney Jeffrey Bowers was fired around this time in, I thought it was San Francisco, I don't know. He was fired for having the sarcoma lesions on his face. He became one of the first AIDS discrimination cases, and he was the basis for the movie Philadelphia years later. This was also the year that Bowers versus Hardwick was upheld, which criminalized oral and anal sex, but it doesn't even specify that it's specifically for the gays. So, like, these laws are still in the books for everybody. They are in North Carolina. I don't know about anywhere else, but they're still in the books. So, 1987, AZT becomes available as a treatment, but it's not really, but it was made available as the treatment. You're supposed to take 100 milligrams every 4 hours around the clock, which sucks. February of that year, Liberace died. The Testing the Limits Collective was formed by Greg Bordowitz and David Mirren, who filmed the first Wall Street demonstration and put out the first direct action AIDS activism documentary. This is also the month where Cleve Jones creates the first panel of the AIDS quilt. March 12th, we get to ACT UP, when the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power is started by Larry Kramer at the Lesbian and Gay Community Center in New York City. March 19th, AZT is approved. March 24th, 250 ACT UP members demonstrate at Wall Street and Broadway. 17 are arrested in civil disobedience. This is just one of many ACT UP demonstrations we'll talk about. If you want to know more about ACT UP, you can watch the movie, what the fuck's it called? How to Survive a Plague. April 1st, Reagan finally acknowledges that AIDS is a public health crisis in his speech to Philadelphia doctors, the NIH. By this time that he gave the first speech on the subject, 36,058 Americans had been diagnosed with AIDS, and 20,849 had died from it. I also haven't pointed out yet that, like, early days, this was, like, 100% death sentence. Like, there's no natural immunity to HIV, which is one of the problems with finding the vaccine. There's no natural immunity. You just died. So, April 15th, the important thing about ACT UP is, like, they were so organized about, like, teaching their community, like, media tactics. They were so media savvy, and that's, like, part of why they were, like, kind of the biggest movement for this. So, they know that they'll do stories about last-minute tax filers. So April 15th, they demonstrated at the New York City General Post Office because they knew the media would be there already. So this is when they get conflated with the Silence Equals Death movement, which was created about a month prior by 6 people in New York City as a consciousness-raising group inspired by the Guerrilla Girls. The Silence is Death is, like, on a black flag with that phrase and a pink triangle, just representing you know, in the war, if you were homosexual, you got pinned with a
The pink triangle,
So,
yeah.
right. August 18th of that year, we have the first clinical vaccine trials approved by the FDA. And so in these later ACT UP demonstrations, you'll literally see people hooked up to an IV at these demonstrations be like, I'm in a clinical trial, like, I'm here because I want to live, like, period.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, October 11th of that year, ACT UP makes its public debut at the second March on Washington for gay and lesbian rights. So this was, like, a huge event. I think, like, Whoopi Goldberg was there. It was a big deal. People go home and form their own local ACT UP chapters. It was 6 days of protests, mass weddings. That's when the AIDS quilt was shown for the first time. And then the year after that, established it as National Coming Out Day. There was also increased visibility for the bisexuals who founded the North American Bisexual Network in 1990. So lots of people started to organize after this. And I just wanted to read, like, the demands, because protest isn't a protest unless you have specific, well-researched demands. So here we go. The legal recognition of lesbian and gay relationships. The repeal of all laws that make sodomy between consenting adults a crime. A presidential order banning discrimination by the federal government. Passage of the Congressional Lesbian and Gay Civil Rights Bill. An end to discrimination against people with AIDS, ARC, HIV-positive status, or those perceived to have had AIDS. Massive increases for funding for AIDS education, research, and patient care. Money for AIDS, not for war. Reproductive freedom, the right to control our own bodies, and an end to sexist oppression, an end to racism in this country, and apartheid for South Africa.
Interesting how many of these are still going strong.
Yeah, it's almost like nobody in the powers that be are in the interest
Give
of
a shit. Yeah.
November of that year is when the book And the Band Played On is published by Randy Schiltz. The title is kind of just referencing the fact that the band played on and nothing changed and nobody cared. Well, literally people were going to funerals every weekend. December 4th, the ACT UP LA splinter was established. 1988. January, there was this article published in Cosmo that was, like, super misleading about like HIV and how it was contracted and who could contract it. So a group of women organized separately from ACT UP for the first time when Cosmo refused to retract it. And they were, like, holding up signs that were like, Cosmo girls get AIDS too, which is, like, so horribly and hilariously fucked up. So the ACT UP Women's Caucus starts targeting the CDC for its narrow definition of AIDS because it was presenting differently in women, just like heart attacks present differently in women. So they were being diagnosed with, like, something similar to AIDS, but it meant that they couldn't get, like, the Social Security benefits of being a person with AIDS.
Right.
So eventually they made it so, like, once your T cells are lower than, like, 200, I think you get diagnosed with AIDS. And they added, like, 3 more of the, like, diseases that present in AIDS and women a lot, and, like, expanded the definition of AIDS.
Yeah.
March 24th, there's another demonstration on Wall Street and 100 arrested. May 26th, there's a report by the Surgeon General that we talked about earlier, distributed to every household, the first time a federal authority explicitly laid out how to stay safe. It's called Understanding AIDS. This is 7 years after the crisis started. And at the time, it was the biggest print campaign ever. I don't know how that compares with, like, if they did anything for COVID, so I don't know. October 11th, ACT UP shuts down the FDA for a day with precise demands for how to make experimental drugs available more quickly. 120 are arrested, and this is when people kind of realized, oh shit, they understand our processes. They understand that we're, like, there's a cold bureaucratic authority that's not letting people try experimental drugs. So these people are, like, starting Buyers Club. They're, like, distributing medical journals. Like, they knew what the fuck was up. These people went to, like, Harvard, Tufts. Like, ACT UP was, like, the real fucking deal. So this is when people were sort of like, oh shit, maybe they do know what's up. November 4th, Reagan signs the Health Omnibus Programs Extension, the HOPE Act, which authorized the use of federal funds for AIDS prevention, education, and testing, and it establishes the Office of AIDS Research. December 1st of that year, we have the first World AIDS Day. December 16th, Sylvester dies. FDA approves the importation of non-approved treatment for personal use. Greg Bordowitz meets John Gene Carlamusto, and they produce a cable show Living with AIDS up until 1994. Grand Fury, which was an activist and artist collective formed from 11 members of ACT UP, became the unofficial propaganda ministry and guerrilla graphic designers who would do things like replace newspaper dispensers, New York Times, with the New York Crimes, and they would kind of like put posters up over advertisements on buses. So they were kind of like, their whole thing was they were like interrupting the flow of advertisements to force people to read about AIDS. So 1989, we get Diva TV, Damned Interfering Radioactivist Television, formed by Greg Bordowitz and Gene Carlamusto, Ray Navarro, Ellen Spiro, and others to create direct action videos to distribute on public access television. That year, 7 ACT UP members infiltrated the New York Stock Exchange, chained themselves to the VIP balcony to protest the cost of AZT, which at the time was $10K per year per patient. And then it was lowered to $6,400 per year per patient.
And this was this was in $1989 too.
Yeah. So this was also the year we have this case of Bracci versus Stahl Associates, which is the first time gay couples were recognized to be the legal equivalent of a hetero family. This person's partner died of AIDS, and the landlord was trying to say he doesn't get to stay in the apartment because he's not related by a blood family or marriage, and so this established that, like, no, they weren't related. This year, Dr. Anthony Fauci endorses giving people with AIDS access to experimental treatments, even if they don't qualify for a clinical trial. The number of cases reaches 100,000 in America this year. So the CDC provides $11 million for 7 community health centers designated for testing and counseling, which is kind of a precursor to the Ryan White Care Act, which we'll get to. March 9th of this year, Robert Mapplethorpe dies. If you haven't read Just Kids by Patti Smith, you absolutely fucking should. It's amazing. September 18th, the National Commission on AIDS meets for the first time. In December, there's a die-in at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York that turns into pandemonium. There's also footage of this in How to Survive a Plague. It's amazing to watch. There's 111 arrested, and some just are carried out on stretchers because they just lied on the floor and like pretended they were dead, so refused to move, so they just carried out on stretchers. Diva TV filmed footage of this and created this film in 1991 called Like a Prayer. So 1990, February 16th, Keith Haring dies. April 8th, Ryan White dies. May 21st, 1,000 ACT UP members demonstrate in Bethesda, Maryland at the National Institute of Health aimed at Dr. Anthony Fauci because of slow project progress and research and to demand that trials include more women and minorities. July, the ADA is passed, which includes specific protections for HIV and AIDS patients. July 26th of 90, George H.W. Bush signs the Ryan White Care Act, which allocates $221 million in the first year. Of course, like, George Bush has never done anything heroic, so there was definitely like conservative clauses in here, which is why it passed. Specifically validating, like, only in states that have explicitly criminalized knowingly passing the virus, shit like that.
It's always the fucking fine print.
Yeah, it's always the clauses. October 26th, AZT is approved for pediatric use. Also in October, the ACT UP Women's Caucus protests in Washington, holding signs that say shit like, women don't get AIDS, they just die from it. This led to 15 conditions being added to the official diagnosis in 1993. November, Tom Fogarty dies. 1991, clinical trials start for AZT. Visual Artists AIDS Caucus starts the Red Ribbon Project, which got a lot of attention because a lot of actors wore the Red Ribbon the next month at the Tony Awards.
Broadway still does a lot of that activism and fundraising as well, still to this day.
Oh yeah, you'll always see it. 91, we get the Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS Act enacted by Congress. January 22nd, we get the Day of Desperation, which is we have 3 activists sneak into the CBS News studio during the broadcast, and this is, of course, during Desert Storm. Oh my god, during Desert Storm. So they're holding signs and saying shit like fight AIDS, fight AIDS, not Arabs, which I love. Same night, same thing at PBS. This was also when the Needle Exchange Group in New York presented the health department with thousands of used syringes from their campaign. The next day, activists were hanging banners at the Grand Central Terminal, like across the timetable, releasing balloons with information, all that sort of shit. May of that year, Angels in America comes out. September that year, Miles Davis dies. September 5th, we get the Treatment Action Group, TAG, who covered Senator Jesse Helms' house with a giant condom. They split up from ACT in 1992 as an independent AIDS research and policy think tank fighting for better treatment, a vaccine, and a cure for AIDS. And the situation was also not parodied. They did a scene of this in Pose one season. So November 7th of that year, Magic Johnson announces he's HIV positive. November 24th, Freddie Mercury confirms he has AIDS, dies 24 hours later. November 29th, on Black Friday, activists chain themselves inside a Macy's after they wouldn't hire an HIV-positive Santa. December, we get 500 How to Fuck Safely pamphlets passed out outside of Seattle High School, which led legislation passing called like a harmful to minors law, and so you're not allowed to give out information to people under 18. So that year we get the Women's Treatment and Research Agenda created from the ACT UP women's caucuses all over the country, and this is like the first national version. Then we also get Fierce Pussy created in association with ACT UP as a lesbian feminist art collective in New York City by Jean Carl Musto, Suzanne Wright, and others to focus specifically on lesbian identity and visibility. I think they're still around. The next year, in 1992, AIDS becomes the leading cause of death for American men aged 25 to 44. April 20th, there's a Freddie Mercury tribute concert for AIDS awareness, which draws 72,000 people to Wembley Stadium. May 27th, the FDA licenses a 10-minute diagnostic kit for use by health professionals. That year, Ian McKellen opens up an outpatient center for those with HIV/AIDS. I didn't really mention much about Europe, but Ian McKellen, so.
Yeah.
October 11th, we get Ashes actions during the AIDS quilt display, because they knew that there would be a lot of cameras for the quilt display, and this was kind of in opposition to, not opposition, but like in contrast to people being like, oh, the AIDS quilt, it's so beautiful, like pretty little quilt things, and they were like, look, I'm not stuck with anything beautiful, I'm stuck with ashes and bone fragments of my friends. Right. So this was a march to the White House lawn, and they illegally dumped their friends' ashes on the lawn, which is cool as fuck, and the friends were like part of the movement. Also, like, their families had disowned them, so nobody else was there to take their ashes. So that year we get the first clinical trials of using multiple drugs. The FDA starts accelerating approval to get drugs to people with AIDS quicker. This is 11 years after the epidemic started. 93, May, FDA approves the female condom. June, Clinton establishes the Office of National AIDS Policy. Congress enacts the National Institute of Health Revitalization Act, giving the Office of AIDS Research primary oversight over all health institute AIDS research, requiring agencies to expand inclusions of women and minority in their research because it presents differently in women and minorities. August of that year, we get the Women's Interagency HIV Study and HIV Epidemiological Study, both federally funded. December 14th, the movie Philadelphia comes out. December 18th, the definition of AIDS now includes CD4 or T-cell count below 200. So 94, AIDS becomes the leading cause for all Americans aged 25 to 44. February 17th, author Randy Schultz dies. June, FDA approves the first protease inhibitor. August 5th, pregnant women are advised to take AZT. November, the number of cases in the U.S. passes 500,000. December 23rd, FDA approves oral HIV test. 1995. March 26th, Eazy-E dies. June, SQV becomes available as treatment, making highly active antiretroviral therapy possible. Heart. June 27th, PWA launches the first National HIV Testing Day. September 22nd, the National Academy of Sciences concludes that syringe exchanges are effective. December 6th, Bill Clinton holds the first White House conference on HIV/AIDS. That's my timeline.
That was a lot.
was a lot. Could have been a
So
lot shorter.
yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of information in there, and I think at this point, especially like the newer and younger generation of queers, like our age and younger, kind of see this as like, you know, like history, like it's not something that we can touch still, but there like we still feel a lot of these same effects. Like there's still stigma, and I'm pretty sure Red Cross still doesn't accept blood donations from gay men,
Yeah, they don't.
because of this. Um, and you know, there's still no cure. People are still testing positive for it. We've made a bunch of leaps and bounds in terms of research and reducing the deadliness of the disease, but like this is not something that's like,
It's not a death sentence anymore.
yeah, but this isn't like, it's not like polio or the Spanish flu or something where it's like in history and we don't, it doesn't affect it. It still does affect us, and it's crazy.
Yeah. So, I texted you this, but so the 49th annual San Francisco Pride Parade was held in 2019. And it was at that point the largest gathering of gays and lesbians and all those types ever. So, you would think that 2020 would be on track to be the largest after that. But then the government
There was an epidemic.
And handling a virus.
Which seems sickeningly appropriate, I think. Like our, what is it? Bicentennial? Our bicentennial celebrate or something? I don't know.
I think you're right.
Totally thrown off by the government.
You're 50
once again,
50 year.
Not knowing how to handle an epidemic. Yeah. Well, thank you for all of that information.
Yep.
Yeah. So thank you to everyone who has listened. For those of you that have, like Carolyn said, try to find ways, if you can, to get involved with your community in general, but also, and this doesn't just go for, gay people, but like people in hospice, a lot of times the sick and the elderly are just kind of written off, and then people forget that they're people, and it's just kind of a horrible way to die. So if you're able to get out and get involved, that's fantastic. Yeah, so that's our time. Thank you everybody for listening. If you want to keep up with us, you can follow us on Instagram at Mutable Immutables. You can find us on Twitter at Immutables Pod. You can also find us on YouTube at Mutable Immutables, and you can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts.
Yep.
I'm going to try to include in the description some of these source links that Carolyn has a wealth of. But also, I mean, there's just a lot of information out there that's just readily available. So, yeah.
All right, and I'm going to go remove every shred of progressive thought and watch some trash TV. Love Island 2022, baby.
Well, have fun with that, love.
UK.
All right, y'all.
Bing bang
Happy
bong.
Pride. Happy Pride. Y'all take care.
All right,
bye.
Bye.